topic for today is about barriers and strategies in communication. Okay, so what are our lesson objectives for this afternoon? First, for you to be able to identify the reasons for communication breakdown. Second, classify examples of these barriers. And the third one, be able to use the strategies taught to communicate across cultures and avoid communication breakdown. Okay, so just like people in communication, there's also breakdown. But unlike us, the reason of our breakdown is sometimes it's problems, family problem, financial problem. It could be broken relationship, okay, problems, stress. That could be some of the reasons of why we break down, right? But in terms of communication, the reason of communication breakdown is what we so-called the barriers. Okay? Before we discuss the barriers, let's discuss first what is effective communication. Okay? So effective communication happens when the receiver does not only get the message, but he or she must truly understand it. Okay? Meaning, the communication is effective if the receiver understand or truly understand the message. Okay, so that is an effective communication. But we know and we are aware that effective communication doesn't happen always, right? There are times that whenever we are communicating, we sometimes can't understand the whole message, right? Hindi natin maintindihan yung kabuuan ng message. Hindi palagi, right? So, what is the reason of that? This is also what we call the barrier, just like what you've watched in the video, right? So, in that video, because of misunderstanding, because of language barrier, they wasn't able to understand each other, okay? So, now let's discuss what are the examples of these barriers, okay? Let's have our first one. Okay, yan. This is the first barrier in communication. This is what we call language barriers. Okay, so language, this one, language plays a vital role in communication, right? Because we often use language in order to communicate. Either it be vocal or written, right? Kahit pa siya ay voice or kaya written, we often use language to communicate. But language is also one of the barrier in communication. Okay, let's find out why. As second language learners, there will be times when misinterpretation happens. This may be caused using terminologies or nuances that are not familiar to us, thus creating confusion between the sender and the receiver of the message. Okay, that is language barrier. We Filipinos, our mother tongue, our first language is Tagalog, right? Most of us, our second language is English. Meaning we are second language English learners, right? So tayo yun. Tayo ay second language learners ng English, okay? And as you can notice, if you will try to communicate with someone whose first language is English, especially American, di ba? Their language, their mother tongue is English. If you communicate with them, right? So most of the time, or sige, maybe sometimes, or there are times that you can't understand what they say because they're very fluent. They speak so fast. What else? Their accent is different. The terminologies, the words that they use, some of the words that they use are not familiar to us, right? Because they're very, very fluent in that language. How the way or here in our country, since it's Tagalog, we are very fluent in Tagalog, right? So ganun din sila, they're very fluent in English. And that's the reason bakit nagkakaroon ng language barriers, okay? Because we have different language, okay? Just like this. Difference in language, okay? So because of different language, before, we weren't able to communicate with people from other country, right? But because of English language, communicating with people from other country became possible, right? That's why English is considered as a universal language for us to communicate with other people from another country because most of them have different language, right? And in order for us to communicate with them, we use English language, okay? You know, I just want to share to you because I've taught in a company where I am teaching English to Chinese students, to foreign students. Okay. So I experienced teaching foreign students of English. Okay. I just observed that it's hard. It's really hard for me to teach at first these students, specifically the Chinese, because they really find it hard to pronounce words, the English words. Unlike us Filipinos, we are not really better, but we easily learn and pronounce words compared with Chinese. Okay, and also I observe that in teaching language, okay, so especially if my student cannot really speak English, okay, it was hard for me to communicate with him or her. Okay, I experienced that, and what I did is every word that I will say supposed to every word that I supposed to say to that student, I translate it first to Chinese before um I say it to the student. Actually, I did not say the words in Chinese, but what I did is I just chat the student in our classroom. Because in our classroom, we have chat box. Okay? So I just chat the Chinese word so that he or she can at least understand what I am teaching. Okay? So mahirap pag hindi nakakaintindi ng language that you are using. Okay? For example, you are communicating with someone who have different language. So of course, maghirap talaga. Hindi kayo magkakaintindihan. Okay? Next, accent and dialect. Okay? That could be a language barrier. Use of jargon and slang. And lastly, speech defects. Okay? All of these are composed in language barriers. Okay? That's the first one. What is the second barrier? Look at this. Observe carefully. Yan. Look at the man. So as you can see, it's like he is shocked, right? Or he is surprised. Look carefully. Or it could be pwede siyang nervous, di ba? So here in the picture or in the video, if you are nervous while speaking, you are shy, yan, that barrier is what we call psychological barrier. Based from the word psychological, of course, this barrier refers to mental barriers. Okay, remember, they are mental barrier that refer to the social and personal issues of a speaker towards communicating with others. Okay, so yan ang psychological barriers. What are the example? Example of psychological barriers are trauma. Okay, so of some of the kids or kaya naman even not kid, 'di ba? We have sometimes if we had past or bad past experience, right? Pag nagkaroon tayo ng bad experience before, it's really traumatizing. Sometimes it affects our speech or the way we speak. Yung iba nga especially yung mga bata pa na nagkaroon ng trauma sa isang bagay, dahil doon sa trauma na yon or sa nangyaring yun, naapektuhan din yung pag-inik niya. Hindi na siya makipag-communicate sa ibang tao because of that trauma. Okay? So that is psychological barrier. What else? Shyness. Yan, pagkamahiyain. That is a psychological barrier. Okay? I know some of you experience this, di ba? Or still experiencing this, pagiging mahiyain. Hindi naman talaga mawawala yan sa isang tao. It's natural, right? Even me, I experienced being shy, especially when I was high school, particularly. Okay? When I was high school, I'm really shy compared when I was elementary. To the point that whenever my teacher is calling me, or whenever my teacher is asking me to read something from my notebook or from my book, I'm really shaking. Okay, to the point that my teacher will say, every time I'm calling you, it's like you're about to collapse. Para daw akong mahihimatay na. Pag tinatawag ako ng teacher ko, ganun ako kamahiyain and katakot umimik sa harap ng maraming tao. Even classmates ko pa yan, nahihiya pa rin ako. Okay? So sometimes, you're gonna think, kailan mo kaya ito ma-overcome? Kailan mo kaya ito malalampasan? Kailan ka kaya hindi magiging mahiyain pag nakikipag-communicate ka, kapag umiimik ka, right? But little by little, you can develop it through socializing with other people, through different activities, especially communicative or activities related to communication. Okay, so me, I overcome being shy, too shy, because of my line of job, because I'm talking with a lot of people and a lot of students. Yan, I was able to not really, wala na akong natitirang kahihiyan or hindi na talaga ako nahihiya. But then, whenever I'm speaking to someone or to a large of audience, nawawala na. Hindi na ako masyadong nahihiya. Yan, parang medyo naging confident na ako in terms of speaking. Okay? And since I'm talking about confidence, yan. So dito naman, lack of confidence. Okay? So I know also some of the students are also experiencing this. Lack of confidence, especially in communication skills, right? Sometimes you lack in confidence in information that you're going to share. What else? You lack in confidence in terms of speaking, right? You lack in confidence in terms of dealing with people, diba? So those are some factors to consider in terms of confidence, right? But me personally, because before, when I was college, when I was college, we are always reporting. Okay, so even though we always do that, starting from second year to fourth year, even though we're always doing that, hindi pa rin ako nasanay. Palagi pa rin akong natatakot umimik. Hindi ako confident mag-report sa harap ng aking mga classmates. Kahit pa they are close to me, I'm familiar with them, I'm still not yet developing my confidence. Okay? Until pa rin, nung first year experience ko, hindi ko pa rin na-develop. Kahit na nag-OJT na ako, nag-first year experience ako, first year experience of teaching, I'm still not yet developing that confidence that I like. Okay? So, and now at this age, since it's my third year of experience in teaching yan, somehow na-develop ko na. And one of the greatest factor why I developed my communicative skills is because of my job last year, which is being an English teacher to foreigners. Okay, we call it English as a second language, ESL teacher. Okay, so because of that, I was able to communicate with a lot of people also, especially the Chinese students. Okay, and I developed my communicative skills, especially English. Okay, and because of that, na-build ko na yung confidence ko. And nadala ko siya dito sa school na to, which is teaching senior high school. Okay? So, lately ko lang na-realize na ang laki palang tulong. Pag you're always speaking, you're always sharing knowledge with people, it will help you to develop your communicative skills and your confidence as well. Okay? So, if right now, if you are not yet developing your confidence, don't worry. Time will come, you can also develop that. Okay? So, gaining experiences will really help you a lot. Okay? So, next one. Depression, okay? Depression is also a big factor in psychological barriers. Why? Because when you are dealing with depression and anxiety, you are thinking a lot of things, right? Emotionally, physically, diba? And also mentally, especially, right? And since it's a mental barrier, mahirap yung pagsabayin. That's why depression is a really a big factor in psychological barrier as well as anxiety. Okay, so all of these things contributes to psychological barriers. Okay, now let's proceed with our third one. The third barrier, look at this. It says there, can't hear you. Okay, ano kaya yan? Pag you cannot hear clearly, what is the type of barrier? Okay, so this type of barrier is physiological barriers. Okay, So physiological barriers, of course, yan. So this is refer to physical state of a person, okay? This refers to the physical state of a person that affects him or her in communicating, okay? Just like this one in the photo or in the video. Yan. So there, as you can see, if you have poor hearing, if you cannot hear clearly, that will affect you in communication. Why? Of course, it will be your disadvantage. You will not get and understand the message well because you can't hear well, right? As you can remember in our previous discussion about listening, right? So good hearing is needed for effective listening, right? So if you can't hear well, you cannot effectively listen. And if you cannot effectively listen, you cannot effectively communicate. Okay? So that's the reason why it's a physiological barrier. Okay? The physical state of a person. What is the physical state of a person? He or she can't hear well. Okay? What else? If a person is blind, if the physical state of a person is blind, if he or she is blind, that also affect the communication. Maybe you're gonna ask, Mom, why? And we do not we often use our mouth, our voice to communicate, right? I mean we just use our eyes to see, right? But this eyes or our visual ability help us to interpret a message well. Especially, we are seeing the facial expression of a person. If we are seeing the body language and the sign language of a person, right? And if we can see that, we can easily interpret a message. And if you are blind, how can you see that, right? You can only hear, right? And you can have a feedback, but you will not see the physical state of a person. Okay? So that is a disadvantage also. So yun ang ibig sabihin ng physiological barriers. Okay? So I hope you can follow. If you have questions, you can raise your hand and ask me a question if you have clarifications as well. Okay? And also, if meron kayong mga queries, pwede dyan sa chat box. Okay? Now, let's move on with the next barrier. Okay? So the next barrier is physical barriers. Okay? So don't be confused to physiological and physical. Pag physiological, the physical state of a person that affects him or her in communicating. Pag physical barriers, these are the barriers that came from outside factors, the external noises. Okay? Yan, kagaya yan. Dogs barking, pwede yan. Physical barriers yan. Pwede ring chicken, noises from chicken, yan, mga roosters, yan. Okay? So physical barriers are described as structural obstructions in both human-made and natural environments that block effective communication so that messages cannot be sent from the sender to the receiver. Okay? Remember, it blocks. Okay? For example, this is the message and this is the physical barrier, right? So how will be the message be transmitted to the receiver if merong naka-block dito, right? That's the physical barrier, okay? So what are the examples of physical barrier yan? Sorry if you can hear a dog. Let's proceed. What are the examples? Yan. So wait lang ha. Okay, let's continue. Physical barriers. So we have noises around you, especially noises from people. Noises from people talking loudly, especially in public places. Okay, that's a physical barrier. What else? We also have noises coming from vehicles and also loud noises or loud sounds. What else? Lastly, we have geographical distance. Okay, distance is also considered as a physical barriers. Okay, so the distance is also a barrier in communication. Okay, so why? Because, for example, you are communicating through phone call. Yan. If you're just communicating through phone call, you will not be able to see the facial expression and the body language of a person. And that hinders you from understanding the message well. And pagka naman you are having video calls where you can see really the person, so that's good. But then what will be the disadvantage of that if it's still distance? So it will be the connection, the internet connection, okay? Pwede ding noises around you, okay? So these are the physical barriers. Tatandaan, these are external noises, okay? Next one, next barrier is systematic or systemic barriers. What is this type of barrier? This barrier refers to hindrances in the structure and organization of an organization where there is inefficient or lack of appropriate information systems or communication channels. Okay? Yan ang systematic or systemic barriers. When we say this barrier, when we talk about this barrier, for example, your teacher gave you an activity and your teacher forgot to include when and where are you going to pass the activity. So that's a systematic or systemic barrier. If the information you have received is incomplete, is inefficient, has lacking of information or appropriate information, okay? Yun ang systematic or systemic barrier, okay? So why? Because roles and responsibilities may be unclear pag kulang-kulang ang information. Thus, a person may be confused as to what role he plays in communication process, right? So that's the reason why whenever you are communicating, it must be complete. The information must be complete and must not create confusion to the receiver. Okay, remember that. Next, last one. Last barrier is this one. Look, it's attitudinal barriers. Okay, based from the word attitude. Okay, what is this? Conflict from this barrier arises because of poor management. Yan, poor management of speaker, di ba? Sometimes pag ang speaker, it's kind of boring and lack of motivation. Okay, sometimes that will be the reason why we will get bored and we will not listen anymore to the speaker, right? That's why it's an attitudinal barrier. What else? Resistance or internal or interpersonal conflicts, okay? Pag meron kayong alitan between you and the speaker, okay? The attitude of a receiver significantly affects how he or she understand the message, okay? So, of course, if your attitude is really a negative one, mostly your understanding in the message is also negative. For example, your attitude is you are superior. You see yourself superior or greater compared with the speaker. If that's your attitude, your message or your understanding to the message will appear differently. Why? Because you will question the quality of that information. Because you see yourself as you are good, you are better than the speaker. Okay? It's like you're going to ask, why would I listen to this person, right? I'm greater than him or her. I'm better than him or her, right? Or kaya naman no, you tend to disagree sometimes, right? Kasi meron kang alam, meron kang kanya mong alam, right? And also, pag kayo may pagkakaalitan, yan. Pag halimbawa, galit kayo when you are communicating, okay? So that could be an attitudinal barriers. Of course, if you are angry, most of the time, ang umaandar dyan is your emotions, right? And most of the time din, pag emotions ang umaandar compared sa utak when you are communicating, okay? So that will be a problem at the end, right? Kasi, sample, galit na galit ka, di ba? Pag galit na galit ka, you can utter or speak words that are foul or that can really hurt someone, right? So that's why attitude really affects the way you understand a message. Okay, so those are the 5 barriers. What are those? The first one is language barrier. Second is psychological barrier. Third is physiological barrier. Fourth is systematic or systemic barrier. And last one, this one, attitudinal barriers. Okay, so tatandaan nyo these barriers and its definitions and what are their differences. Okay, so before I continue, do you have any more questions? Any more questions? Section 19. Do you have any questions? None. Okay, so let's proceed. Yan. Okay, so this one, we're going to talk about the strategies in communication. Okay, even though we have barriers in communication, don't worry, you can or we can solve these barriers. We can overcome these barriers. Okay, there's a strategy for us to avoid the barriers that I discussed a while ago. Okay, so let's, sorry, let's continue. First strategy is practice active listening. Okay? So you just try to go back with our discussion about listening. Diba? I told you the models of listening, active listening, and passive listening. Right? So active listening is important in communication. If you always actively listen to the person you are speaking with, of course, there will be a mutual understanding between the two of you. Okay? And if you actively listen, if you listen well, you can respond, you can have a good feedback to your speaker or to your receiver. Okay? That's why it's important that you always actively listen. Kasi pag ang pinaandar nyo is passive listening, para siyang pumasok sa kanang tenga, labas sa kaliwang tenga. Parang, anong tawag dun sa, wait, I forgot. Parang tagusan lang yung information. Okay? Para siyang, hindi naman see-through. Ano bang tawag doon? Para siyang lampasan lang. Yan. Lampasan lang ang information that you are receiving. Okay? If you apply passive listening, meaning you are not absorbing whatever message you are receiving. Okay? That is active listening. You listen with understanding. Okay? Second strategy, pay attention to non-verbal cues. Okay? Just like what I mentioned a while ago, non-verbal signals, they are important in communication. Okay? It's not just, yes, you hear the message well. Yes, you can communicate, you can speak, but you also have to consider the non-verbal signal of a person whenever he or she is communicating. Okay? Because there are times that what you say contradicts with your action, right? Kaya meron tayong kasabihan, action speaks louder than words, right? For example, sa isang relationship, okay? 'Di ba sa isang relationship, sometimes the girl, or I mean the boy will ask the girl, "Are you okay? Are you fine?" Right? And sasabihin ng girl, "Yes, I'm fine. I'm okay." But then it contradicts her non-verbal signal, 'di ba? It contradicts with her action. It seems like through her action, she's really not okay. But verbally, she said that she's okay. 'Di ba? Kaya minsan nakakagalit ang mag-couple. Kasi kahit na hindi pala siya okay, ang sasabihin niya okay, right? But then the girl just wants the boy to understand and to see what is really the meaning behind that okay. And the girl wants the boy to read her body language, right? But then ang boy sasabihin, if you are really not okay, you can say it. Hindi mo kailangang itago, okay? If that's really how you feel, you just say it. Wag mo na akong pahulain, di ba? Kaya minsan nagkakagalit, okay? That's why body language is important, okay? You learn how to read also the body language of a person, okay? And also body language or non-verbal signal are good indicators if someone is interested in listening to you. If someone is lying, diba? If someone is telling a truth. If someone is not confident in speaking or not comfortable in speaking through his or her nonverbal signal. Okay? Examples, ways of talking, like pauses, stress on words, posture, yan, appearance, head movements. Sometimes whenever we are listening to someone, 'di ba tumatango-tango tayo? Parang it's a signal that we are listening, we are understanding, right? Next, hand movements. eye movements or kaya eye contact, di ba? So, there are people na parang through eye contact, nakakapag-communicate na tayo. Parang sasabihin natin, tinginan pa lang, alam na natin ang ibig sabihin. 'Di ba? Meron tayong type of friend na ganun, na kahit tinginan lang, alam niyo na agad ang ibig sabihin. Gets niyo na agad ang isa't isa. 'Di ba? So, that's a non-verbal signal. Next, facial expression. Yan. Facial expression is a good factor or a big factor in non-verbal signal. Okay? Next, body contact, closeness, and sounds, okay? And marami pa, not just these. There are many factors in nonverbal, okay? Meron tayo diyang kinesics, yan. Haptics, proxemics, this was discussed during first quarter, okay? Proxemics, haptics, paralanguage, appearance, okay? And chronemics, yan. So all of them are nonverbal signals, okay? Third strategy. Okay, this one. The third strategy is keep your emotions at bay. Okay? So what do we mean by this strategy? Because there are times that when our emotions are too high, we tend to keep promises, we tend to speak words that can hurt the feeling of other people, right? And we don't want you to regret that at the end. So better yet, you keep your emotions at bay. If you feel like your emotions are too high, you have to keep calm. Okay? You relax first before speaking to someone, before communicating. Okay? Because that will help you to express yourself even more. Pag kalma ka na, 'di ba? So that's why we have the principle in communication that communication ay, sige, wait lang. Wait for a while. Okay?